Clara didn't hesitate as she poured the dark liquid into the horse's mouth. Her hands were steady, even as the world around her seemed to hold its breath. The black stallion thrashed in the dust, foam bubbling from its lips, its wild eyes locking onto hers. The heat of the summer sun beat down mercilessly, and yet the crowd behind her was colder still, the air thick with judgment. They'd never thought her capable of much, especially not this. Clara Jane Whitmore, the preacher's sickly daughter, wasn't supposed to save anything. Not a horse, not a soul, certainly not a town. But now, as the horse's breathing slowed, as the foam finally stopped bubbling, Clara knew she had done something no one thought she could do. She hadn't just saved the horse. She'd proved that she was more than the town's whispers, more than the label they'd branded her with, Scarecrow. The question was, would they see her for what she was, or would they continue to mock the woman they'd always called a ghost? Elijah Cooper's face, still wild with panic, softened as he knelt beside her, his rough hand joining hers on the horse's neck. The horse's pulse, once erratic, steadied under Clara's fingers. For a moment, Clara allowed herself a breath, her heart pounding in her chest, as the reality of what she'd just done settled in. "You saved him," Eli whispered, his voice rough with disbelief. She didn't answer at first, too caught up in the rawness of the moment. There were too many eyes on her. Too many people who'd never given her a second thought now, watching as if she were something more than the frail woman they all had pity on. But Clara wasn't interested in their pity. Not anymore. "I gave him medicine," Clara replied quietly, standing up slowly, dusting her knees off. "The rest was luck." "Luck?" Eli shook his head slowly. "I've seen 3 horses die from a Mojave green bite, and not one of them lasted past 10 minutes. That wasn't luck." The crowd around them was murmuring now, divided into whispers of awe and disbelief. Some, like the wealthy widow Minerva Ashford, were already backing away, making sure they stayed far from the dust and the smell of the work she'd just done. Others, like the blacksmith and the shopkeeper, were peering over Clara's shoulder with newfound respect, but it didn't escape her notice that no one had moved to help when the horse had needed it most. They had all watched, she had acted, and the horse was alive because of it. Eli turned toward her, his face still tense but softened by something more. Gratitude. Something she'd never expected to hear directed at her. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather pouch, the clink of coins unmistakable. "How much?" he asked. Clara stiffened. She wasn't interested in money, not for this. "It didn't help. Nothing would help this dress now," she replied, shaking the dust from her skirts. Eli didn't seem to hear her. His gaze lingered on the horse. Midnight, the stallion Clara had just revived. He stared at the animal like it was the last piece of a life he'd once known. Then he turned to Clara, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't pity or distaste. It was raw, desperate appreciation. "You're Whitmore's daughter, aren't you?" His voice was low, almost as if he were testing the waters. "Clara Jane Whitmore," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. She didn't offer her hand. "Not yet." "Eli Cooper," he said, almost as if the name carried a weight, a meaning she didn't understand. "The doctor's drunk. He's no use now. You're the only one who saved my horse." Clara wanted to respond, to deflect, to tell him it wasn't about her, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt the weight of all their eyes on her now, the town's eyes, more focused on her than ever before. They had seen what she could do, and it scared them. She could feel the fear in the way they whispered, in the way they backed away from her, as if she were some kind of witch, a healer. She didn't care what they said. Not anymore. She straightened her shoulders, taking a step back, her eyes not leaving the horse. "He'll need water," she said quietly. "Clean water. Rest. Don't let him run for at least 3 days." Eli nodded, his hand still lingering on the horse's neck, almost as if he couldn't let go of what she'd done for him. "You're not what I thought you were," he muttered under his breath, but it was loud enough for Clara to hear. Clara didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned, brushing past the crowd that had gathered. The whispers followed her, sharper now, but she refused to acknowledge them. She had saved a life today. That was enough for her. It wasn't until she reached her father's house that the weight of everything began to settle in. She had saved a horse. She had proven herself. But at what cost? What would her father say? What would the town say? They would never accept her for what she was. The preacher's daughter. The strange one. The girl who was too thin, too sickly, to be of any use to anyone. But as she walked through the door of the small house, her father's eyes narrowed as he saw her dusty dress. His Bible was clutched in his hands, his face unreadable. "Sit," he commanded, his voice as cold as ever. Clara obeyed, sliding into the chair at the rough wooden table. She folded her hands in her lap and waited for the storm she knew was coming. "I heard what you did today," he said after a long pause. His voice was thick with disapproval. "You made a spectacle of yourself." "I saved a horse, Father." "You made a spectacle," he repeated, his voice rising, "in front of the whole town. A preacher's daughter, playing with potions, thinking she's some kind of healer. It's unnatural, Clara. It's a sin." Clara didn't respond, but she could feel the tears pricking at the edges of her eyes. Her father's words always cut deeper than any knife. And yet, for the first time in a long while, Clara didn't feel afraid of what he might do or say. She had done something today, something that mattered. She had saved a life, and nothing he said could take that from her. The next few days passed in a blur of whispers, prayers, and silent judgments. Clara went about her duties like she always had, though it was harder now. Every glance, every muffled comment from behind closed doors felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She tried to ignore it, to focus on the small tasks that had always given her purpose: gathering herbs, helping Mrs. Patterson with her laundry, avoiding Main Street and the town's watchful eyes. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of Elijah Cooper kneeling beside her, his desperate eyes fixed on her as she saved his horse. That moment had changed everything. It wasn't just the horse. It was the way he'd looked at her, like she was something worth saving. Like she was more than the sickly girl everyone had whispered about for years. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, the steadiness in his voice when he thanked her. "Clara." The sound of her name drew her from her thoughts. She turned to find Eli standing in the doorway of her small house. His face was tired, his shirt dusty from the day's work. But there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something that made her heart beat faster. "Mr. Cooper," she said, keeping her voice steady. She'd learned to keep her emotions in check, to hide the parts of her that had always felt too much. "What brings you here?" "I came to thank you," Eli said, his voice low, "for saving Midnight." He stepped inside, the door creaking softly behind him. "I've been meaning to do it properly, but I didn't think you'd accept payment." Clara frowned, confused. "I told you, I didn't do it for money." "I know," Eli said, his eyes softening. "I know, but I'm not used to being in your debt, and I wanted to do something. So I thought, maybe I could offer you something else." Clara took a step back, wary. "What do you mean?" Eli reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small, weathered book. It was old, the leather cover cracked and worn with age. Clara's breath caught in her throat when she saw it. "Materia Medica and Therapeutics by Dr. Alfred Still," she whispered, her fingers itching to touch it. She had seen this book once before, years ago, in a traveling doctor's wagon. She had begged her mother to buy it for her, but they couldn't afford it. The book was a treasure, a coveted text for any healer, and it cost more than her father made in a year. "How?" Clara began, but she couldn't finish the question. "I asked around," Eli said quietly. "The apothecary in Junction City said this was the book every real healer dreams of owning." "I thought you might want it." Clara took the book from his hands, her fingers trembling as she traced the gold lettering on the spine. "You're giving this to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli nodded. "I don't have much to offer, but I know this is something you need. Something you've wanted." Clara felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes. She didn't know what to say. The gesture was so unexpected, so kind, It left her speechless. She clutched the book to her chest like it was a part of her mother, something tangible she could hold on to. For a moment, the weight of all the years of silence, of being invisible to the world, seemed to lift from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Eli replied, his voice rough. "Just use it. Whatever happens, don't stop doing what you do. You're a healer, Clara, and the world needs you." For a moment, they stood there in the quiet room, the weight of his words settling between them. Clara felt something shift within her, something she hadn't realized she was missing. It was a sense of belonging, of being seen, not as the preacher's sickly daughter, not as the girl with too thin bones, but as someone who mattered. "I don't know what I'll do with it," Clara said, her voice soft. "I don't even know if I can really heal. I don't have the credentials. I only have my mother's teachings." Eli looked at her, his gaze steady and sure. "Your mother was a healer, wasn't she?" Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "She was, but she died before she could teach me everything." Eli stepped closer, his voice quiet but strong. "She would have been proud of you, Clara. You're doing exactly what she taught you, and I think she would have wanted you to have this." Clara looked up at him, meeting his gaze. His eyes were filled with something she hadn't expected. Respect, maybe even admiration. But there was more there, too. Something deeper, something that made her heart race in her chest. "I'm not asking for anything," Eli said, his voice quiet. "But if you need a place to rest, a place where you don't have to hide, you know where to find me. Cooper Creek's only a few miles north of here." Clara didn't respond at first. The thought of leaving her father, of stepping away from the life she had known, made her heart tighten in her chest. But at the same time, the thought of escaping the constant judgment, the suffocating weight of the town's expectations, was tempting. "I can't just leave," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "I have to take care of things here. My father, he won't understand." "I know," Eli said, his voice soft. "I'm not asking you to run away. But if you ever need a place where you can breathe, where you can just be yourself, you've got a place at Cooper Creek. No questions, no judgments, just peace." Clara looked down at the book in her hands, the leather still warm from his touch. She didn't know what the future held, or if she would ever find peace in a world that seemed to hate her for simply being who she was. But in this moment, standing there with Eli, holding a gift that meant more than anything she'd ever been given, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Thank you," she whispered again. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Eli replied. "Just take care of yourself, Clara. That's all I ask." He turned and left, his boots crunching against the dry ground outside. Clara stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words and the book in her hands sinking in. For the first time, Clara felt like she was more than just the girl everyone overlooked. She was a healer, a woman with a future, and for the first time, she realized that future didn't have to be alone. The next few days passed in a blur of whispers, prayers, and silent judgments. Clara went about her duties as usual, though the weight of the town stairs felt heavier with every passing minute. She kept her head down, avoided Main Street, and focused on the quiet, healing work she had always done, even when no one had cared to notice. Her hands worked through the herbs, grinding them in the mortar, her thoughts wandering back to that moment when she saved Eli Cooper's horse. She hadn't thought of it as anything more than something she was trained to do, a simple act of mercy, of life-saving knowledge passed down from her mother. But for the first time, someone had seen her for what she was, what she had always known herself to be, deep down, a healer. Not the thin, sickly preacher's daughter, not the strange, quiet girl with the bones that never seemed strong enough. Eli's gratitude had left her unsettled, unsure of what it meant. She'd done what needed to be done, nothing more. But the way he had looked at her, that raw thankfulness in his eyes, had planted a seed in her heart. It wasn't pity. It wasn't just that he owed her. He saw her, and that made everything feel different. By the fourth day, as she sat in the back of the house, grinding dried elderflower, the sound of hooves echoed outside. She paused, a flutter in her chest. She knew who it was before she even looked up. "Miss Whitmore." Eli's voice came through the open door, and Clara's heart skipped. She straightened, brushing her hands against the apron she wore. She had tried to push him from her thoughts, tried to convince herself that he had simply been grateful for a life saved, and that was all. He had made his offer. He had given her the book. That was enough. But now, standing in the doorway, there he was. His worn boots and dusty hat still had the same roughness to them, but today there was something different, something more. A vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Mr. Cooper," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of emotions. She pushed her hair back from her face and motioned for him to come in. "What brings you here?" Quote, "I came to check on you," he said quietly, taking a step inside, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "I've been thinking about what happened, about the horse, and about you." Clara blinked, feeling a heat rise in her chest. "You don't need to thank me again. I did what anyone would have done." "I know," Eli said, his voice low, "but it's more than that." He paused, looking almost like he was searching for the right words. "You've done something that no one else in this town has. You've saved lives. You've given people something they didn't think they could have, hope." Clara took a slow breath, unsure of what to say. She had never thought of herself as a source of hope. She had always been the one in need of it. But standing there, with Eli Cooper looking at her like that, like she was more than just the town's outcast, something shifted inside her. "You don't know what it's like," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "To be invisible. To always be the one everyone talks about but never sees. I've spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong. And then I did something, and for the first time, someone noticed me, really noticed me." Eli stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't need anyone else's approval, Clara. You are seen by me, and by the people you've helped." Her heart stuttered in her chest. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with an emotion she wasn't sure how to handle. But before she could respond, Eli reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, weathered book. Her breath caught when she saw it. The same book she had once begged her mother to buy, a textbook on herbal medicine and healing. She had dreamed of owning it, but the cost had always been too high. "Materia Medica and Therapeutics," Clara whispered, her fingers trembling as she took the book from his hands. "How did you?" "I asked around," Eli said simply. "I knew it was something you needed, something that would help you keep doing what you do. I thought it was time you had it." Clara could hardly believe what she was holding. The book she had wanted so badly, the book that had seemed so out of reach, was now in her hands. She ran her fingers over the cover, feeling the weight of it, the years of knowledge inside. Her mother had always spoken of it, but Clara had never imagined she would one day own it. "You don't have to do this," she said, feeling overwhelmed. "You've already helped me more than I could ever repay." Eli's expression softened, and for the first time Clara saw a tenderness in him that went beyond gratitude. "I don't want anything in return. You've already given more than you know, and I'm not going to let anyone make you feel small." "Not anymore." Clara stood there, the book in her hands, her heart a mess of conflicting emotions. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not her father, not the townsfolk, not even the people she had helped over the years. "I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head, her voice thick. "I can't take something like this from you." "You already did," Eli said softly. "You've given me something no one else could. You saved my horse, and maybe, just maybe, you're the only person who can help save this town." Clara looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words. This town, the one that had never really seen her, had only ever used her. But now, Eli was offering her something more than gratitude. He was offering her a chance. "I don't know if I'm ready," Clara said, the vulnerability in her voice making her words feel foreign. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be." Eli smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I'm not asking you to be anything, Clara. Just be yourself, because that's more than enough." For the first time, Clara felt like someone truly saw her, not just as the daughter of a preacher, not just as the fragile, sickly girl everyone had written off, but as a woman with something real to offer. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, clutching the book to her chest. "I'll think about what comes next." Eli nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here if you need me." He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, he paused. "I'm not asking for anything, Clara," he said, his voice gentle. "But if you ever need a place to rest, you know where to find me." Clara didn't say anything as he left, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something more for her out there, something beyond the walls of Dusty Hollow. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling of the life Clara had known. The whispers in town hadn't died down. If anything, they had grown louder, more insistent. Clara had always felt the weight of Dusty Hollow's eyes on her, but now it was different. Now it wasn't just about her being the preacher's sickly daughter. Now it was about what she had done. She had saved Elijah Cooper's horse, yes. But in the process, she had saved something else. She had saved a small piece of herself. Eli's offer, that small seed of kindness, had taken root in her heart. She had always told herself she couldn't be more than the fragile girl who healed with herbs and potions, someone dismissed and hidden by the world. But after the moment she had shared with him, she found herself wondering if she could be something more, if maybe the world had been wrong about her. And so she worked. Day after day, she kept herself busy, gathering herbs and helping where she could. But something felt different. Every time she passed someone in the street, she felt their gaze on her back. Some faces were hard to read, their eyes curious or filled with judgment. Others filled with something new, respect, perhaps, or even gratitude. But the weight of it all pressed against her chest, and every day it became harder to breathe. One evening, after a long day spent grinding dried lavender and yarrow, Clara was making her way back home when she saw a familiar figure standing in front of her father's house. Eli. His boots were dusty from the road, his hat low over his eyes, but he was standing tall and solid as always. There was something in the way he stood, an unspoken strength that drew her in. "Mr. Cooper?" Clara called softly, not wanting to disturb the stillness of the night. Eli turned at the sound of her voice. His face softened as he saw her. "Clara," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I have been meaning to come by. You busy?" "Not too busy," she said, walking toward him slowly. "What brings you here?" Eli hesitated for a moment before speaking, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about the town, about what you said, and about everything that's been happening." Clara paused, suddenly unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you've been feeling the weight of it all, the whispers, the eyes on you, and I know you've been thinking about what comes next. But I'm telling you, Clara." He stopped, his voice tight with something Clara couldn't quite name. "You don't have to do this alone." Her breath caught in her throat. She had been so focused on what she could do for the town, for the people who had never seen her for who she really was. She hadn't stopped to consider what she needed, what she wanted. She had been running on nothing but willpower for so long that she hadn't given herself a moment to just be. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered, almost to herself. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Eli took another step toward her, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to have all the answers. You've already done more than enough, more than anyone thought you could. And the town's starting to see it, Clara." Clara looked down at her feet, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. "I don't think they'll ever really see me. Not like you do. Not like you see me." Eli reached out, gently lifting her chin so that her eyes met his. The warmth in his gaze made her heart skip a beat. "I don't see you as anything less than exactly who you are. You're not the girl they've always called a ghost. You're Clara Jane Whitmore, a healer, a woman who saved lives when no one else would, and you deserve to be seen for that." Clara's breath hitched. She could feel the weight of his words sinking into her, cracking open the walls she had spent so long building around herself. "I've spent so many years trying to be invisible," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't know how to be anything else." "I know," Eli said quietly. "But now you don't have to be invisible anymore. You don't have to hide who you are. I've seen what you can do, Clara. And I think the whole town's starting to realize it too. Her throat tightened as she looked at him. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that, for once, she wasn't just the person everyone else thought her to be. That maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for her. But what if they never change? She asked, the doubt creeping into her voice. What if they always see me as something less? They will change, Eli said firmly, but it's not up to them, it's up to you. You've already proven more than anyone could ever ask for. And if you need to walk away from here, from them, you don't have to stay. You can go somewhere else. You can be free. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach at the thought of leaving everything behind. She had always known Dusty Hollow, for better or worse. But what did it mean to leave? What would she become then? A part of her longed for freedom, for a life away from the stifling expectations. But the other part of her wasn't sure if she could really let go. I don't know if I can leave, she admitted, her voice shaky. This place, it's all I've known. Even with everything that's happened, I can't just walk away. Eli nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Then you don't have to. But you can take control of your own life, Clara. You don't have to be trapped here. You can stand tall. And I'll stand with you, no matter what. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of safety and solidarity that she hadn't realized she was missing. For the first time, she wasn't alone in her fight. She wasn't alone in her struggle. I'll think about it, she said quietly, meeting his gaze for the first time since he had arrived. You don't have to think about it alone, Eli replied softly. Just know that whatever you choose, I'm here. Clara nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. As Eli turned to leave, she watched him walk away, feeling something inside her shift. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her, after all. A future where she wasn't defined by the town's whispers, where she wasn't bound by the walls she had built around herself. And maybe, just maybe, that future could begin with her standing tall beside the man who saw her, not as the ghost of Dusty Hollow, but as Clara Jane Whitmore, healer, woman, and perhaps something even more. Clara spent the following days in a haze of uncertainty. The weight of Eli's words lingered like a constant presence, a reminder that the world didn't have to stay the way it always had been. She could change it. She could change herself. But the fear of what that would mean, what it would cost, kept her locked in the small, familiar cage of Dusty Hollow. Despite her inner turmoil, she couldn't help but feel the pull of something greater. Something was shifting inside her. She no longer felt like the girl everyone had dismissed. She was beginning to see herself as Eli saw her, a healer, a woman with purpose. But every time she tried to step forward, she felt the cold hands of her father's expectations and the town's judgments pulling her back. On the fourth day after Eli's visit, Clara was standing in the cemetery behind the church, gathering herbs when the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. She knew instantly who it was before she turned to look. The rhythm of the horse's stride was familiar, comforting in a way that made her pulse quicken. Eli. She stood up, brushing dirt from her skirts and tying the small bundle of herbs she had gathered. The evening light was dimming, casting long shadows across the graves. When she turned, she found Eli riding toward her, his silhouette framed by the fading light of the sunset. He looked every bit the man she had seen from a distance, the stoic rancher with the weight of loss written on his face. But tonight there was something different in his gaze, something that made her heart beat just a little faster. Miss Whitmore? Eli called softly as he dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Mr. Cooper, Clara replied, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness she hadn't expected. She adjusted her bundle of herbs, suddenly unsure of how to stand or what to say. You've been hiding out here again, Eli said, the corner of his mouth twitching into a half-smile as he looked around at the quiet cemetery. I needed to think, Clara answered, avoiding his gaze for a moment. She wasn't ready to look into his eyes and feel the flood of emotions that always came when he was near. She had spent her whole life avoiding feelings, pretending they didn't exist. But Eli made her feel things she couldn't control. "I'm not here to disturb your peace," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right. You've been avoiding the town, avoiding me. I wanted to make sure you knew you weren't alone in all of this." Clara glanced up at him, her throat tightening. "I didn't know what to think," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't even know what I want anymore. I've spent my whole life keeping to myself, hiding from the world. And now," she trailed off, feeling the weight of her own uncertainty. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," Eli said, stepping closer, his hand brushing against the bundle of herbs in her arms. "You've done enough already. The town needs someone like you, Clara, and I'm not the only one who sees it. You've changed things. People are starting to notice." Clara shook her head, not convinced. "They notice when it's convenient for them," she said bitterly. "When they need something from me, when they want to point fingers or mock me. But they'll never really see me. Not like you do." Quote. Eli's expression softened as he stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Clara, you have no idea how much you've changed things already. You saved my horse, and in doing that, you saved me. You reminded me what it was like to have hope again. I know you don't want to hear it, but you matter. You matter more than anything I've known in a long time." Clara's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as she looked up at him. His eyes were earnest, filled with something deeper than she had expected, something warm, something she didn't know how to handle. "I'm just a healer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's all I am, nothing more." "You're more than that," Eli replied, his voice firm. "You're someone who has the power to change the world around her. You've been doing it all along, Clara. And I don't care if it's in some small way or in a big one. You matter, and I want to help you see that." Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him, feeling the weight of everything they had been through in such a short time. She had always been alone in her struggle. Her mother had taught her how to heal, but she had never had anyone beside her to share the burden. But now, standing here with Eli's steady gaze meeting hers, she realized that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything." Eli's eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite name. He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek gently. "Because you remind me of what I lost," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you've given me something to believe in again. And because—" he paused, his breath shaky as he looked down at her. "Because I can't let you go through this alone. Not when I know there's something between us." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected him to be so open, so vulnerable. And yet, there he was, standing in front of her, his emotions laid bare. "I can't promise you anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. I've spent so many years building walls around myself, I don't know how to take them down." "I'm not asking for anything from you, Clara," Eli said, his voice soft but firm. "I just want you to know you don't have to do it all alone. I'm here, and I'll always be here, no matter what happens next." Clara looked up at him, her chest tight with a mixture of emotions she couldn't name. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could trust her heart, or if she could trust Eli with it. But in this moment, standing in front of him, the world felt just a little bit lighter. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, the uncertainty heavy in her voice. Eli gave her a small smile, his hand still on her shoulder. "Then take your time," he said gently. "But know this. Whatever you choose, you're not alone." Clara nodded, her heart still racing, but feeling something new, the first stirrings of hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her. And maybe, just maybe, that future could begin with Eli Cooper by her side. The morning came slowly, like the town of Dusty Hollow was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Clara couldn't sleep. The bed beneath her was too soft, the room too quiet. She hadn't been used to such luxury. Her whole life had been spent in the small, cramped rooms of the church or her father's house, surrounded by the faint smell of wood and dust, and the constant, unspoken pressure of expectations. It had been a long time since she had felt peace, and even now, in the stillness of Eli's guest room, the thoughts were louder than ever. They swirled around her like the dust that clung to her boots, making her feel heavy, like she couldn't breathe. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of her father's anger or the weight of her own desires that was crushing her. Her fingers brushed the worn edges of the book Eli had given her, the one that had once seemed out of reach. It felt like a different kind of weight, one she could almost bear. The promise it held was bigger than anything Clara had ever imagined. But could she truly step into that world? Could she really embrace the healer her mother had always wanted her to be, despite everything? The whispers, the judgment, the pain. Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling land beyond the ranch house. The fields were quiet in the early morning light, the grass bending gently in the breeze. It was peaceful here, so different from the noise and chaos of Dusty Hollow. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She straightened quickly, trying to steady her breathing. The sound of Eli's voice drifted in through the door. "Clara, you awake?" She turned toward the door, a mix of emotions rushing through her. "Yes," she called back, her voice soft but steady. "I'm coming." Eli was already inside when she opened the door, standing just beyond the threshold with a slight smile on his face. He was dressed in his usual work clothes, his boots scuffed from the day's labor. But there was something in his eyes, something unspoken, that made her heart race. "Morning," he greeted her, his tone light, but with an undertone of something deeper. "Morning," Clara replied, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. She wasn't sure why his presence made her so flustered. They had spoken before, of course. But there was something about the way he was looking at her now that made everything feel different. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Eli said, his voice dropping slightly, as if the words were heavier than they seemed. "You looked, well, not yourself last night." Clara frowned, uncertain of what he meant. "I'm fine," she said quickly, "just a bit tired. That's all." Eli didn't look convinced, but he didn't push her further. Instead, he took a step toward her, his eyes searching hers. "Clara, I need you to know something," he said quietly. "I want you to be safe. No matter what happens, you don't have to face it alone." Clara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to tell him everything, that she was scared, that she didn't know if she could really be the woman everyone thought she could be, that she was terrified of what would happen if she left everything behind. But the words wouldn't come. "Eli," she said finally, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I can stay here. I don't know if I'm ready for everything that's coming." Eli's face softened and he stepped closer. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, but you should know this. You don't have to face it alone. If you want to stay, I'll be here. If you want to go, I'll help you. No matter what, I'll be by your side." Clara felt the weight of his words settle into her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of someone else's care, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of something real. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can let myself believe it." Eli reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt through her, and she found herself looking up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "You don't have to believe it all at once," he said softly, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. "You just have to believe that you deserve it. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else. Now it's time for you to take care of yourself." Clara stood still, feeling the weight of his words. She had never allowed herself to believe she was worthy of love, of kindness, of anything more than the life she had been given. She had always told herself she wasn't strong enough, not brave enough, not capable of anything more than what was expected of her. But maybe, just maybe, Eli was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "I'll try," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try to believe that." Eli smiled at her then, a small, soft smile that seemed to reach his eyes. "That's all I'm asking. Just try." The sound of horses, hooves outside, interrupted the moment. Eli turned toward the window, his expression immediately shifting to something more guarded, more alert. "We've got company," he said, his voice steady. "Looks like we're not the only ones interested in what's going on in Dusty Hollow." Clara felt a sudden surge of unease. "Who?" Eli turned to her, his face hardening. "We'll find out soon enough." The tension in the air shifted as the door to the house creaked open and the figure of Rosa appeared, her face tight with concern. "Mr. Cooper," Rosa said quickly, her Spanish accent thick. "There are men coming down the road, headed this way. They look like trouble." Eli's jaw tightened. "Stay inside, Clara. Don't open the door for anyone." Clara wanted to protest, to argue that she could handle whatever was coming, but the look in Eli's eyes stopped her. He was already thinking ahead, already preparing for what might come next. "I'll be fine," Clara said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'll stay inside." Eli gave her one last lingering look before he turned toward the door. He moved quickly, pulling on his coat and adjusting his gun belt, his eyes scanning the yard outside. Clara watched him from the doorway, feeling a mix of fear and hope swirl within her. She didn't know what was coming, but for the first time she didn't feel as alone as she had before. The world outside was changing. And maybe, just maybe, Clara could face it with Eli by her side. The men on horseback arrived in a cloud of dust, their figures cutting through the heat of the afternoon sun. Clara stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure who they were, but something about the way they rode, fast and with purpose, made her uneasy. Eli was already standing in the yard, his posture rigid, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. The ranch hands, who had been gathering supplies for the day, quickly moved into position, spreading out to keep watch. Rosa had gone inside with Clara, her sharp eyes never leaving the window, always alert. "They're coming closer," Eli muttered to one of his men, his gaze fixed on the approaching riders. The air around them crackled with tension, like a storm about to break. Clara stepped outside, her feet heavy against the dirt, her pulse quickened as the riders drew nearer. She didn't recognize the horses, nor the men riding them, but the look in Eli's eyes told her everything she needed to know. These weren't friendly visitors. "They're not from town," Eli said quietly as she stood beside him. "I don't know who they are, but they're here for something." Clara's eyes darted from Eli to the men, who were now nearing the edge of the property. They were well armed, their faces grim and determined. The tension in the air felt thick enough to slice with a knife. Eli gave a slight nod, signaling for his men to stay alert. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. "Don't make any sudden moves." Clara nodded, her hands trembling at her sides. Her heart was pounding. Each beat a reminder of the danger they were in. She had faced so much already, so many years of being overlooked, of being dismissed, but this, the unknown, the threat to everything she was starting to build, was something different. The air felt thick with fear and anticipation. As the riders reached the edge of the yard, one of them raised a hand in the air, signaling for Eli to approach. Eli didn't hesitate. With a sharp glance at Clara, he moved forward, his boots crunching in the dry earth. The leader of the group, a tall man with dark, sun-kissed skin and a scar running down the side of his face, spurred his horse forward. His eyes were cold, calculating. "Cooper," he said, his voice rough, almost gravelly, "we've got business." Eli didn't flinch. "I don't know who you are or what kind of business you're looking for, but you're trespassing on my land. And I don't take kindly to it." The man on the horse smirked, the corners of his mouth turning down in a sneer. "You'll take kindly to this," he said, his hand slipping into his coat. He pulled out a piece of paper, holding it high in the air for Eli to see. Eli's jaw tightened. "What's this?" Quote. The man tossed the paper at Eli's feet. Eli bent down and picked it up, his eyes scanning the words written on it. His face darkened with each passing second. "It's a legal order," the man said with a cruel laugh. "You're to vacate Cooper Creek Ranch. Your land is no longer yours. It's been claimed by Judge Peton and his associates. You're to leave immediately." Clara's heart sank as she took a step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "You can't do that," she said, her eyes searching Eli's face for any sign of hope. "This is your home. It's your land." Eli's gaze never wavered from the man in front of him. "This is my land, and you've got no claim to it." The man chuckled darkly. "Judge Peton's orders are clear. You're to vacate, now." Eli stood tall, his posture unwavering. He looked over at his men, and then back at Clara. "You can tell Peton that he's not welcome here. He's not welcome anywhere around here." The leader of the group raised an eyebrow, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "You think you can fight Peton? You've got no idea what you're dealing with. He's a man of power. People listen to him." "I don't care about his power," Eli said, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable edge of defiance. "You don't scare me. You don't scare anyone who's with me." The man stared at him, sizing him up, trying to read him. "You'll regret this, Cooper. I can promise you that." Eli stepped closer, his boots kicking up the dry dirt beneath him. "You and your boss have been trying to take this town from the inside for too long. But you're not going to take this land. Not without a fight." The leader of the group didn't speak for a long moment. He simply glared at Eli, his grip tightening on the reins of his horse. Finally, he gave a nod to the other riders. "Let's go," the man said, his voice cold. "We'll see you again, Cooper, and next time it won't be a friendly visit." As the riders turned and began to leave, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Eli remained where he was, his eyes focused on their retreating figures, his hand still resting on the grip of his gun. Clara stepped toward him, her hand trembling as she reached out and touched his arm. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly, her voice full of concern. Eli nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the road. "I'm fine, but they won't stop coming. Peton wants this land, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it." Clara's heart clenched. "What do we do now?" Eli turned to face her, his expression fierce but filled with something else. Determination, maybe, or a quiet resolve. "We fight together." Her pulse quickened. The weight of everything they were up against pressed down on her shoulders. But in that moment, standing beside Eli, Clara knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. She had never felt so certain of anything in her life. Whatever came next, whatever battles they would face them together, side by side. Eli took her hand, his grip strong and steady. "You're not alone, Clara. Not now. Not ever." Quote. Clara squeezed his hand, a silent promise passing between them. Together. The war for Dusty Hollow had only just begun, but Clara was ready to fight.